The rain in Red Hollow didn't come often, but when it did, it hit like judgment from the heavens. Cold, heavy, unforgiving. Elias McCree stood beneath the warped roof of the old telegraph station, arms crossed, coat dripping, eyes fixed on a figure across the muddy street. A boy, no more than 9, barefoot, soaked to the bone, tied to a wooden post just outside the general store. Around the boy's neck hung a wooden sign, crudely painted in black. Thief. No one moved, no one spoke. The townsfolk of Red Hollow watched from windows and doorways, hidden behind curtains and cowardice. The boy didn't cry. He stood still, small hands clenched into fists, shoulders trembling from the cold more than fear. Rain streamed down his face like tears, but his chin never dropped. His eyes stayed low, but they were burning. Elias saw it, saw too much of his own boy in that face. He hadn't come to town for this. Truth be told, Elias hadn't come to town for anything. He passed through Red Hollow once a month for supplies, always alone, always silent. Ever since the fever took his wife and son 3 years ago, he hadn't spoken more than a few words to another soul. But something about this wasn't right. McCree stepped into the rain. His boots sank into the wet earth as he crossed the street. Heads turned. A few folks recognized him. The former sheriff, the one who walked away from everything. He didn't speak as he reached the boy. He took out a pocket knife, opened it with a flick of his thumb, and sliced through the rope binding the child's wrists. The sign slipped into the mud. "Come on," Elias said quietly. The boy looked up, eyes sharp, defiant, but followed. Together they walked past the church, where the old reverend watched in silence. Past the saloon, where music played but no one laughed. Past the sheriff's office, where the badge inside sat unused. They rode out of town without another word. Back at the cabin, dry clothes were scarce, but the fire was warm. The boy sat close, blanket wrapped around him, shaking. Elias poured him a cup of coffee, weak and more water than brew. It was something. "Name?" Elias asked. "Jonah." "Why were you tied up?" "I took bread," Jonah muttered. "For my sister." Elias didn't respond right away. He stared into the fire. His knuckles tightened around the tin mug in his hand. Jonah looked up, voice small. "You can punish me, not her." The words hit harder than any bullet. Elias didn't speak again that night, but at sunrise, when the skies cleared and the earth steamed, he saddled his horse, and when he returned to Red Hollow, he wasn't alone. He brought both children with him, and this time, no one dared look away. The dusty streets of Red Hollow were still damp from the storm as Elias McCree rode in, the sun rising behind him like a silent witness. The old bay horse stepped carefully along the boardwalk, each hoof tapping against the planks in a steady rhythm that drew eyes from behind curtains and swinging saloon doors. Jonah sat behind him, arms wrapped tight around McCree's waist. In front, nestled in the crook of Elias's arm, was his little sister, barely 5, frail and coughing softly into the fabric of McCree's coat. The trio stopped in front of the bakery. Inside, the smell of rising bread met the morning air like a temptation. The baker, a round man with flour in his beard and guilt in his eyes, froze as the door creaked open. McCree stepped inside with both children. He placed the girl gently on the floor and Jonah beside her, then reached into his coat and pulled out 3 tarnished silver dollars, real money, earned over years of solitude and work on the edges of the land. He set the coins on the counter. "Feed them," he said. The baker hesitated. "Mr. McCree, Sheriff, they're hungry," Elias said flatly. "They stay until they're full." Behind them, townsfolk began gathering outside, drawn by the sight of the old lawman returning with 2 street children in tow. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that McCree? Did he bring them back? Why's he feeding them?" The baker nodded quickly and shuffled into the back. Moments later, warm rolls and boiled eggs were set on the table. Jonah hesitated, watching Elias, unsure. "Eat," McCree said. The boy obeyed. As they sat at the table, the town watched in stunned silence. Even the sheriff, young, unsure, and barely more than a figurehead under Silas Crane's thumb, stood across the street with folded arms, pretending not to look. Then came the sound of boots, measured, expensive, arrogant. Silas Crane. He stood on the boardwalk, hat tilted just so, eyes cold as a rattler's. Quite the spectacle, McCree. Elias didn't turn. "They stole from me, from this town," Crane continued. "You setting a new kind of law around here?" McCree stood slowly and faced him. The 2 men hadn't spoken in years. "You accusing children of theft," Elias said, "means less than dirt to me without proof. You'll regret this." "Already do," McCree replied. Without another word, he took the children and walked them out of the bakery, down the street, past the growing crowd. He didn't stop until they reached the old sheriff's office. He pulled open the door. Dust rose in a soft cloud. Behind the desk, in a glass case mounted to the wall, sat the old badge. His badge. He stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he opened the case. The sound of metal clicking against leather echoed in the silence as he pinned it to his chest. From the corner of his eye, he saw Jonah's expression change, not with fear this time, but something closer to awe. Outside, the wind picked up. The streets of Red Hollow didn't look so quiet anymore. The badge felt heavier than Elias remembered. It had once meant something. Before the land deals, before the town fell under Silas Crane's thumb, before he lost everything that gave it meaning, now it burned against his chest, like a second chance he hadn't asked for. He stood in the doorway of the sheriff's office, the morning light catching the dull shine of the star-shaped badge. Across the street, Crane's eyes narrowed. The townsfolk, watching from porches and windows, murmured among themselves, some with worry, others with hope they wouldn't yet admit. Jonah, standing just behind McCree, held his little sister's hand. She leaned against his side, her cough rattling faintly. Crane stepped off the boardwalk, boots crunching through damp gravel. He raised his voice just enough for all to hear. "You can't just step back in and call yourself Sheriff, McCree. That's not how things work anymore." McCree's gaze didn't waver. "Then let's ask the town." "Ask the town," Crane scoffed. "These people know where their safety comes from. They know who built this place, who kept the money flowing through it. You really think they'll trade comfort for chaos, for orphans and washed-up lawmen?" From behind Crane, a voice rang out. "I would." It was the Reverend, stepping forward from the church steps. Bible in one hand, his old spine straight for the first time in years. Then came another voice, from Clara Weston, the schoolteacher, standing beside the burned-down shell of her schoolhouse. Her arms were crossed, her eyes steady. "I stand with McCree," she said. A hush fell over the street. Crane clenched his jaw. "You think one lawman and a couple bleeding hearts can stand against this town's interests?" "I think," McCree said, stepping down onto the street, "that interests change." He turned to face the people, his voice steady, firm. "This boy stole bread. Not gold, not cattle. Bread. For his sister. And none of you lifted a finger to stop what was done to him. That ends now." No one spoke. Then came the first sound, a door opening. An old woman stepped out with a basket of apples and quietly placed it on the steps near Clara. Then another came forward with a loaf of bread. A man McCree didn't know removed his hat and stood beside the Reverend. But not everyone joined them. From the saloon, a tall figure leaned against the post with crossed arms. Rand Lowry, one of Crane's men, a known bruiser, bounty hunter when he needed coin, enforcer when Crane needed silence. Others stayed hidden, watching and calculating. McCree knew this was no victory, just the first move on a crooked board. As he turned to go, a piece of paper fluttered against the post where Jonah had been tied just the day before. McCree pulled it off, a fresh sign nailed up overnight in bold, angry strokes. "Outlaw sympathizer." He folded it slowly and slid it into his coat. Then he looked at Jonah. "You ready to stay, boy?" Jonah looked back at him and gave the smallest nod. Neither of them saw Clara glance toward the badge on McCree's chest. Her expression caught somewhere between memory and hope. The storm had passed, but something bigger was brewing. Red Hollow didn't change overnight, but it did start to shift. By the following week, the air was tense as a drawn pistol. Some folks tipped their hats when Elias passed by now. Others turned their backs. Whispers trailed him wherever he walked, and everywhere he went, Jonah followed close behind, quiet but alert. Clara Weston offered the schoolhouse ruins as a temporary classroom, using salvaged benches beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. McCree helped her rebuild the small fence around it, though he said little. His actions spoke louder. Jonah attended her lessons each morning. His sister Ruth, still too weak to join, stayed in the care of the Reverend's wife. But something in Jonah had started to change. He listened, he studied, and when he sat across from McCree at night, he didn't just eat. He asked questions. "What's a deputy do? How do you tell if someone's lying? Was your son like me?" That last one silenced McCree for a long while. But word was spreading. Crane's grip on Red Hollow had always been quiet. Unspoken agreements, debts no one questioned, promises hidden behind generous loans and threats behind fake smiles. But now, Elias's return had stirred the dust. It was only a matter of time before Crane struck back. It came subtly at first. Cartoons tacked to post showing McCree as a madman, a has-been sheriff corrupted by pity. Then came the signs: fraud, renegade, sheriff of strays. One morning, Elias awoke to a bullet lodged in his cabin door, buried just beside the handle, deep enough to splinter the wood but not pierce it. No note, no sound, just a message. He pulled it free with calm hands and set it quietly on the mantel, beside an old photograph of his wife and son. Later that day, Clara found him hammering new planks over the schoolhouse windows. She didn't ask what happened, she just stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, and handed him nails. "I know who's doing it," she said. "I know too. Are you going to stop him?" He paused, looked her in the eye. Eventually, she leaned against the wall. "This town used to believe in right and wrong. We just got tired." McCree's voice was quiet. "Then it's time to wake 'em up." That evening, he walked into the saloon. Alone, the music stopped. He approached the bar, ordered nothing, and scanned the room. Rand Lowry leaned against the wall, eyes narrow, glass in hand. Another of Crane's men played cards in the back. Elias spoke loud enough for all to hear. "If any man threatens a child in this town again, he answers to me." Someone laughed nervously. Another coughed. Rand didn't move, but his silence was louder than a shout. As McCree left the saloon, he passed a wanted poster near the door. It was blank, just a frame nailed to the wall. No photo, no name. Someone had written on it in charcoal, "Who watches the sheriff?" McCree didn't stop walking, but the words stayed with him. The sun baked the trail that wound along Red Hollow's southern ridge, turning dust to gold and silence into tension. McCree rode alone, coat flapping behind him, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. Something about the cattle wagon that had rolled in at dawn hadn't sat right. It wasn't just the timing, it was the men driving it. Outsiders. Clean boots. Too clean. The wagon bore no markings, but McCree recognized the logo burned faintly into the side panel. A clover leaf, one of Silas Crane's hidden holdings. A front used for moving property, sometimes people, across county lines. He followed from a distance. Near the canyon pass, the wagon veered off the main trail and slowed beside an abandoned barn. McCree dismounted silently, tied his horse behind a thicket, and crept closer through the sagebrush. Inside the barn, voices. "Just 2 more kids from downriver. Sheriff's never gonna know. We sure Crane ain't watching? He don't need to. He owns this whole dust pile." McCree's stomach tightened. Children. They were moving children. He stepped into the barn doorway with the calm of a man who'd faced worse, but not much worse. "Put the girl down," he said. 2 men froze. One held a small child wrapped in a flour sack, barely more than skin and bones. The other reached for his belt. "Don't," McCree warned. The gun stayed where it was. "Back away," he said. They obeyed, but slowly, tense, calculating. Behind them, another man emerged from the shadows, taller, crueler-eyed. Not a laborer, a bounty hunter by the look of him, hired muscle with no code. "You again," the man said. "McCree, right? Heard you were soft now, taking in thieves, orphans." Elias didn't flinch. "Heard you were stupid. Looks like both rumors are true." The man sneered and lunged. What followed wasn't a fight, it was survival, and it wasn't clean. Dust flew, a beam cracked. Elias took a blow to the ribs that dropped him hard, but not before he drove his boot square into the bounty hunter's knee. The sound of splintering bone echoed in the barn. When it was done, the man was on the ground, groaning. The others had fled. McCree knelt beside the child, freed her gently, then carried her back to his horse, every movement deliberate through the pain in his side. He didn't go home. He went straight to Clara's. She opened the door and gasped when she saw him, bruised, limping, shirt torn. He said nothing, just handed her the child, then staggered to the porch and sank onto the steps. She followed, crouched beside him, and touched his arm. "What happened?" "Crane's moving children," he muttered. "Selling them off." Her hand tightened. "We have to tell the town. They won't believe it without proof." She glanced at the little girl, now asleep on her couch. "Then we show them her." McCree closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't planned to stay in Red Hollow this long, hadn't planned to care again. But that barn had changed something, and he knew there was no turning back now. Inside, Jonah stared from the shadows, his face pale, fists clenched. Outside, a shadow moved down the street. Another watcher, another message. Crane would not stay quiet much longer. The midday sun bore down like a furnace, drawing sharp waves of heat off the cracked earth as Elias McCree rode along the southern ridge. His horse moved slow and steady, picking its way through the trail that once carried cattle and commerce, but now felt like a path into something rotten. Elias hadn't told Clara where he was going, not even Jonah. But when a wagon passed through Red Hollow at sunrise, pulled by 2 clean men with softer hands than the reins they held, something in McCree's gut had shifted. They didn't belong. The wagon bore no brand, no cargo markings, but on its side, barely visible through dust and wear, was a faint cloverleaf symbol burned into the wood. McCree knew that brand. Years back, before the town turned on itself, before the badge was locked away, He'd investigated a freight line with the same symbol, one tied to Silas Crane through shell companies and false ownership. It had disappeared from Red Hollow after McCree left office. Now it was back. He tracked the wagon across the dry prairie, keeping his distance. No one rode freight this far off route unless they had something to hide. The trail led to a weather-warped barn by the edge of an arroyo, an old cattle stop long abandoned, hidden enough to be forgotten. McCree dismounted behind a thicket of mesquite, tied his horse and approached on foot. The barn doors were slightly ajar, and inside he could hear them, men talking in low, careless tones, confident no one was listening. "She's small, but she'll fetch enough. Mr. Crane will be pleased. Move the boy next. Then we ride east." McCree stopped cold. "Children." His knuckles tightened around the revolver at his side, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Not until he saw. He crept to a crack in the wall and looked inside. Two men stood by the wagon, now open, with a makeshift cage in its bed. Inside, barely visible, were two children, one lying limp, the other sitting with his knees drawn to his chest. Staring out with wide, terrified eyes, neither looked older than 10. Elias's jaw clenched. He stepped back, drew a long breath, and walked straight to the barn door. It creaked as he opened it. The men turned fast, startled, but not scared. One reached for his belt. "Don't!" McCree said flatly, stepping into the light. They hesitated. One of them recognized him. His face went pale. "That's McCree," he muttered. "The old sheriff?" The other sneered. "Didn't he disappear?" "Looks like he's back." Elias's eyes went to the children. "Let them out. Now." The taller one scoffed, stepping toward him. "You really want to die for a pair of rats?" McCree didn't blink. "You really want to test a man with nothing left to lose?" The silence snapped like a taut wire. The tall man moved first. He rushed Elias, faster than McCree expected, shoulder down. The impact knocked Elias back, but his reflexes were sharp. He twisted, driving his elbow into the man's neck, then dropped to one knee as the second man lunged. A boot to the stomach sent that one sprawling, groaning. The tall one recovered fast, too fast, and slammed McCree into the wagon, knocking the wind out of him. Splinters bit into Elias's back as he fought for breath. The man raised a rusted crowbar, but McCree rolled aside just as it cracked against the wood. In that moment, something returned to him, not just instinct, but purpose. He surged forward, fists tight, and drove his forearm into the man's throat. The crowbar fell. The man staggered back, coughing, and Elias kicked the barn door shut behind them. "Who picked the wrong town?" Elias growled. The taller man charged again, but this time Elias sidestepped and swept his legs. The man hit the dirt hard, dazed. Elias stood over him, breathing heavy, blood at the corner of his lip. He looked at the children, then at the second man, still curled up by the wagon. "Open the gate." The man obeyed, hands shaking. Elias carried the smaller child out first, a girl no older than 5, fevered, limp. He wrapped her in his coat. Then he reached for the boy, who flinched. "It's all right," Elias said, softening his voice. "You're safe now." The boy hesitated, then climbed into his arms. Elias didn't waste time. He led the children outside, mounted up with both cradled in his arms, and rode straight to Red Hollow. By the time he reached Clara's home, the fever in the girl had worsened. Clara opened the door and gasped when she saw him. Shirt torn, lip bloodied, bruises already forming. "What happened?" "Crane's men," Elias said through gritted teeth. "They're moving children." Her breath caught. "You're sure?" He handed her the girl. "Saw it myself." Clara brought the children inside, called for the Reverend's wife. Jonah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, watching as Elias leaned against the wall. Pain finally catching up to him. Clara returned moments later with a cloth and a tin of salve. "You need to rest. No time." "Yes," she said firmly. "There is. Because the moment we move, we'll be fighting more than Crane. We'll be fighting fear. And if you collapse now, no one will follow." He stared at her. She didn't flinch. Neither did Jonah, who stepped beside Clara and looked up at McCree. "We'll stand with you," Jonah said. "All of us." Outside, the sun began to dip behind the hills. Shadows stretched long across the streets of Red Hollow. Something was coming, they could all feel it, and this time, there'd be no turning away. The flames rose in the dark, orange and hungry, casting jagged shadows across the face of Red Hollow. It started as a whisper of smoke. Clara Weston had just finished reading aloud beneath the cottonwood tree that now served as her temporary classroom. Jonah sat cross-legged at her feet, pencil in hand, trying to form his letters with quiet determination. Around them, a half-dozen children scribbled, whispered, listened. Laughter came rarely in Red Hollow, but for a moment it bubbled up, soft, like the memory of something better. Then came the scent, smoke, sharp and bitter. Clara stood, eyes narrowing. A breeze blew through the canyon, carrying more than heat. The children looked up. Ruth coughed in Jonah's arms. That's when they saw it. Black smoke curling up from the far end of town. Clara dropped her book. The school. She ran. Jonah followed, carrying his sister. Others chased after them, bare feet slapping the earth, their excitement turning to dread. Elias was already saddling his horse when Clara rounded the corner of the main street, hair loose, face pale. "It's the schoolhouse," she said. "The old one. What's left of it?" McCree didn't ask questions. He mounted fast, pulling Jonah up with him, and galloped toward the far edge of town. By the time they reached the charred shell of the old schoolhouse, it was too late. The building was engulfed. Wood crackled, glass shattered, smoke billowed high. A small crowd had gathered, some in shock, others too quiet to be innocent. A few crossed their arms and said nothing. The sheriff stood near the well, jaw tight, refusing to meet Elias's eyes. Crane wasn't there, of course he wasn't, but his message was. McCree dismounted, helping Jonah and Ruth down. Clara appeared beside them, her face streaked with ash. She stepped toward the sheriff. "Where were your men?" "They were patrolling the South Ridge." "Convenient," McCree said, his voice like iron. "I don't know who did this," the sheriff muttered, but it sounded like an apology. Clara turned to the crowd. "This was where your children learned, where they felt safe. Someone took that from them. And if we stay quiet, if we keep pretending this isn't happening, what's next?" Silence. A few heads turned. McCree looked at the crowd, scanning the faces, some ashamed, others unmoved. He spotted Rand Lowry standing half in shadow, arms crossed, a slow smirk on his lips. Elias stepped forward. "You want to scare us? Burn our books, break our walls, send children into cages. You think we'll back down?" He reached into his coat and pulled something from his pocket, a piece of the charred sign from earlier that week. "Outlaw sympathizer." He held it up. "You think I'm here for a badge?" He looked at Jonah, at Clara. "I'm here because I should have never left." Jonah's eyes widened. For the first time, he saw something shift in McCree. Not just anger, but regret turned to resolve. That night, as the fire cooled to embers, McCree sat outside Clara's home, sharpening his old knife. His ribs ached, his hands bruised, but his mind was clear. Clara brought him a cup of coffee, sat beside him on the step. "You didn't ask for this fight," she said. He looked at her. "I didn't ask to lose my son either, but I still wake up every day missing him." Clara nodded slowly. "Do you see him in Jonah?" McCree didn't answer right away. Sometimes, not because he looks like him, but because he still believes people can change. They sat in silence for a long time. Then, from down the street, came a soft sound, wooden wheels turning. Children, dozens of them, marching slowly down the main street, holding signs written in crooked, careful handwriting. "We are not thieves. Feed us, teach us, don't hate us. We deserve to stay." No one spoke. Windows opened. Lanterns were lit. The people of Red Hollow stepped outside, drawn by the sound, by the sight of little hands holding truth in bold letters. Jonah walked at the front. McCree stood watching. Clara's hand brushed his sleeve. "What are you going to do?" He didn't move his eyes from the children. "Call a meeting." She frowned. "Where?" He turned to her. "The saloon." Her brow arched. "You're serious?" "I'm done waiting for justice to knock. I'm kicking the door down." That night, McCree returned to the sheriff's office. He lit the old oil lamp, sat at the desk where his name was still carved beneath the drawer, and wrote a notice in large block letters. "Town meeting, high noon, Red Hollow Saloon. Sheriff McCree calls for answers." Then he pinned it to every post in town. The next day would decide everything. By morning, Red Hollow felt different, tighter somehow, like the whole town had inhaled and was holding its breath. The signs McCree had posted the night before were still there, tacked to posts, nailed to saloon doors, even one stuck to the church fence. "Town meeting, high noon, Red Hollow Saloon. Sheriff McCree calls for answers." No one remembered the last time a sheriff held a public meeting. Certainly not during Crane's reign. Most decisions in Red Hollow were made in back rooms, whispered into brandy glasses. But now, the lawman everyone had buried in their memories was walking the street with a badge on his chest and orphans at his heels. By noon, the saloon was full, not with laughter or piano music, but with tight shoulders, furrowed brows, and the crackling tension of people afraid to speak first. Merchants, ranchers, mothers, school children. Clara stood near the bar with her arms crossed, while Jonah sat beside Ruth on a chair someone had cleared just for them. Crane's men arrived last. Rand Lowry entered first, slow and swaggering like he owned the floor. Two more followed, faces McCree knew well. Men who'd once worked for justice before they sold it. They lined the walls, arms crossed, eyes cold, but Crane himself, absent. Elias McCree walked in through the front door, quiet as thunder. The crowd parted. He didn't stand on a crate or raise his voice. He just walked to the center of the room and removed his hat. "I called you here," he began, "because we've all known what's wrong with this town for too long, and none of us did a thing." No one spoke. He scanned the room. "I left this badge behind years ago because I was broken. I buried it along with my son, thinking I could outlive the pain by shutting everything out. But pain doesn't leave just because you ignore it." He paused. "Now I've seen that same pain in the faces of children left to starve in the streets, in women teaching under trees because someone burned down their school, and in men who look away when evil walks right past them." Rand Lowry chuckled. "That's a mighty poetic speech, McCree. Got any proof with all that righteousness?" McCree turned slowly, unbuttoned his coat, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "This is a freight manifest recovered from a wagon abandoned in the Arroyo. It lists 2 children as cargo. No names, no guardians, just weights. It's signed by one of Crane's holding companies, Cloverleaf Freight." He handed it to Clara, who held it high for others to see. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. McCree continued. "I also found this." He pulled out a small metal tag, stamped with a number 36, worn around the neck of a child who couldn't even stand from fever. Rand straightened. "You're making a lot of accusations. I'm stating facts. You think this town belongs to you and Crane, that people are too afraid to speak." He turned to the crowd again. "But I see teachers standing up, reverends stepping forward, children marching with signs instead of hiding behind alleys. That means something." The saloon was dead quiet. Then came a voice. The reverend, firm and clear. "It means we're ready." Another voice followed. Mrs. Hatcher, the widow who ran the feed store. "I knew those wagons weren't right. I didn't think I could do anything." McCree looked around. "You can. You still can." Suddenly, the saloon doors banged open. Silas Crane stood there, polished boots, trimmed beard, that smile of his, a weapon dressed in velvet. "Well," he said slowly, stepping inside, "this is quite the gathering. Didn't think Red Hollow held these kinds of parties anymore." No one returned his smile. Crane scanned the room, lingering on Jonah, then on McCree. "Sheriff," he said with a mock bow, "I believe you're trespassing on my authority." "I believe you've forfeited yours," McCree answered, voice low and steady. Crane's grin faded. "Be careful, Elias. A few orphans and angry school teachers don't make you invincible. This town runs on money, not morality." "Not anymore." Crane's eyes flicked to his men, but none moved. Elias stepped forward. "You're not welcome here. If the people of Red Hollow want justice, they'll have it. If they want you gone, you'll go." Crane smirked. "You don't scare me. I'm not trying to." Crane looked around one last time, saw the faces he used to control now watching him with something new, doubt, some even with disgust. He adjusted his coat and turned. This isn't over. As he stepped out into the sun, silence lingered behind him. McCree turned to the townsfolk. "It's time," he said. "Not for revenge, for reckoning." And this time, no one looked away. The knock came just before dawn. It wasn't loud, but it was firm, measured, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission. It was Clara who opened the door, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face still heavy with sleep. 2 deputies stood there, eyes cold and unreadable. Between them, Jonah. His hands were tied. "What is this?" Clara demanded, stepping into the doorway. "We have orders," said the taller deputy. "The boy's under arrest." "For what?" McCree's voice came from behind her, gravelly with sleep, but sharp with warning. The deputy didn't meet his eyes. "The mayor says he was seen stealing from the general store last night." Clara looked to Jonah. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. "I didn't steal," he said softly. "I didn't even leave the house." McCree stepped forward, now fully awake, the old tension rising in his shoulders. "Who said he did?" "We have a witness," the other deputy replied. "Name?" The deputy swallowed. "Confidential, by order of Mayor Crane." That was all McCree needed to hear. "No, he's not going anywhere." The taller deputy stiffened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. McCree, you're still just wearing that badge. It hasn't been made official. The mayor's the one in charge." McCree's eyes darkened. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him so Ruth wouldn't hear. Jonah stood between the deputies, still as stone, hands bound in front of him. "Then take me instead," McCree said. Both deputies blinked. "What?" McCree stepped forward, raising his hands. "You want a show? Here it is. I'll go. But the boy stays. You'd take the charge of theft for an orphan." "He's not an orphan," McCree said. "He's mine." The words hung in the air like thunder. Clara stared at him, breath caught. The deputies looked at one another, uncertain. Then the door behind them creaked open. Jonah stepped forward. "No," he said. "I can speak for myself." McCree shook his head. "Jonah, I didn't take anything. the boy said louder. "And I don't need to run anymore." The scene drew attention. Doors opened. Townsfolk began stepping outside, drawn by the tension. Clara took Ruth's hand and joined them on the porch. The Reverend appeared from across the street, Bible under one arm, eyes narrowed. "Let's settle this," he said. "Not in shadows, not behind closed doors." That afternoon, the saloon was transformed into a makeshift courtroom. The judge, a weary man who'd long played both sides for survival, sat at a table near the bar. McCree stood beside Jonah. Clara watched from the back, her arms wrapped protectively around Ruth. Silas Crane sat smugly in the corner, legs crossed, cane in hand. "Mr. Crane," the judge began, "you're bringing charges of theft against the boy?" Crane smiled faintly. "The general store owner swears he saw the child sneaking out with a bundle of goods. No purchase, no witnesses to say otherwise." McCree stepped forward. "He was home all night, and we're just to take your word," Crane replied. "You? A disgraced sheriff playing savior to strays?" McCree didn't blink. "I have a witness." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Who?" A soft voice spoke from the back. "Me." Clara stepped forward, slow and steady. "I stayed with them the whole night. Jonah never left the house." Crane's jaw tightened. "I find it curious," she continued, "that just a day after a public meeting, after people started standing up to you, suddenly a child becomes a convenient criminal." Gasps stirred. Crane's mask cracked just slightly. The judge cleared his throat. "If the boy was under adult supervision and we have no other proof, I want him punished," Crane snapped, rising from his seat. "Let the town see what happens when we protect criminals." That's when McCree stepped forward. "You want someone punished?" he said. "Take me." The room fell silent. "I ignored what was happening in this town for too long. I let men like you rise while I grieved in silence. So if anyone's guilty, it's me. I'll take the sentence." The judge stared at him. Jonah's eyes brimmed with something he hadn't shown before. Shock and something deeper. Recognition. Loyalty. Crane laughed bitterly. "You always did like a performance, but something had changed." The judge turned slowly. "There's no evidence, no theft, and if anything, this boy deserves protection, not punishment." He banged a makeshift gavel, a broken broom handle, on the table. "Case dismissed." A cheer broke out, small at first, then growing. Crane stormed out without another word, his face pale with fury. Outside, the sun had begun to lower behind the ridge. McCree stepped out with Jonah at his side, and for the first time, the boy slipped his hand into McCree's. No words, just a bond forged not in blood, but in something deeper. And from the edge of town, Rand Lowry watched, and did not smile. The town square hadn't been this full since the last harvest festival. 5 years passed, before the mine dried up, before the school caught fire, before hope became a currency no one dared spend. Now Red Hollow stood still. Men leaned against posts with arms crossed. Women held children close, and even the dogs stayed quiet. The dust swirled lightly in the wind, but the town itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias McCree stood in the center of Main Street. He wasn't alone. Behind him, Clara Weston, chin high, holding Ruth gently in her arms. Jonah stood beside McCree, not behind him, not clinging, but beside him. His eyes, once so full of caution, now glinted with purpose. Around them stood the people of Red Hollow, some cautious, others finally courageous. Ahead of them stood Rand Lowry and 6 of Crane's hired men. Each one was armed. Each one wore the look of someone used to getting what they wanted without asking. But none of them had drawn yet. It was a standoff of silence, will against fear. Rand spat into the dirt. "This town's forgotten who it belongs to." McCree didn't flinch. "No, this town just remembered." Rand took a step forward. "You think a badge and some orphans make you a sheriff again? I'm not wearing this for me," McCree said, voice calm. "I'm wearing it for them." He gestured to the crowd. "For every man who paid a debt he never owed. For every mother who lost a child to silence. For every kid who got thrown in the dirt and told to be grateful." A murmur rolled through the crowd. A subtle shift, feet moving forward instead of back. Then came the sound. Boots, dozens of them. From the far end of the street, more townsfolk were arriving. Farmhands, a few shopkeepers, even the elderly doctor who hadn't left his clinic in weeks. They came not with weapons, but with presence, with decision. And standing at the front, unexpected but certain, was the current sheriff. Badge still on, but face changed. He stepped beside McCree and said only, "I'm done hiding." Rand looked around. His smirk began to crack. "You want us gone?" he growled. "You gonna fight us all?" "No," McCree said simply. "We're not here to fight." "Then what?" "You're going to leave on your own feet." "Or we'll carry you." Rand glanced at the others, and for the first time their confidence wavered. One man lowered his hand from his holster. Another took a step back. Then Clara stepped forward. She held up the freight manifest. the one from the abandoned wagon, the document with names replaced by weights, children listed like livestock. "This is what your silence supported," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Is this who we are?" The townspeople looked down, looked at each other, and something broke, not in fear, but in allegiance. One by one, people turned their backs on Rand and his men, not in cowardice, but in rejection. Rand snarled, drawing his revolver an inch. Jonah stepped in front of McCree without thinking. The sight of the boy, small, still bruised from days of injustice, standing in defiance, froze the moment. McCree's voice was like thunder in the stillness. "Put it away, Rand. You fire one bullet here. Ooh, and you'll never leave this town." Rand hesitated. His hand twitched. Then he holstered his weapon, turned, and spat again. This place was never worth it anyway. He walked away. One by one, the others followed. Not in a rush, not chased, but discarded. The people didn't cheer. Not yet. They stood together in silence, watching the power that had ruled them crumble, not by violence, but by unity. McCree turned to Jonah. The boy looked up at him. "You really weren't going to let them take me, were you?" McCree knelt, his hand resting gently on Jonah's shoulder. "I already lost one son. I'm not losing another." Jonah didn't speak. He just leaned into him, letting his forehead rest against McCree's chest. From the porch of the old jailhouse, the Reverend rang the church bell once, not for a service, but for something new, something born in dust and fear and fire, but rising now in the light. The letter arrived in the early light, sealed in cracked wax, and carried by a young girl who didn't know its weight. It was handed to the Reverend just after morning prayers. He broke the seal slowly, recognizing the script before he even read the name. His hands shook as he unfolded the parchment and scanned the short message. 3 words caught his breath. "I'm ready, Eleanor." By noon, the Reverend stood on McCree's porch, the letter folded carefully in his coat pocket. Clara sat nearby, mending a torn sleeve, while Ruth napped beneath the window. Jonah was sweeping the porch with slow, deliberate movements, as if the act grounded him. McCree stepped outside, wiping oil from his hands after fixing a broken latch. "You look like a man carrying a ghost," he said. The Reverend didn't smile. "Not a ghost. A witness." He handed Elias the letter. "Crane's wife. She's ready to speak." McCree read the note, jaw tightening. "She'll testify?" "She has everything," the Reverend said softly. "Receipts, bank transfers, land deeds, names of missing families, children, workers who disappeared when they spoke out. All of it." Clara looked up, a mix of hope and fear crossing her face. "Why now?" The Reverend sat slowly on the step. "She's dying. Consumption by the sound of it. She told me years ago she'd stay quiet because she thought she was protecting what was left of her family. But now, she wants to leave something honest behind." McCree nodded slowly. "Then we take it to the people." That evening, just before dusk, the saloon filled again, not with fear, not with confrontation, but with anticipation. Eleanor Crane arrived covered in shawls, helped in by the Reverend and Clara. Her face was pale, lips blue with fatigue, but her eyes were steady as steel. She looked around at the crowd and took a deep breath. "My name is Eleanor Crane," she began, "and I've been silent too long." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the former sheriff looked stunned. Eleanor laid the documents out on a table. Copies of freight manifests, payment logs, and letters from Silas detailing deals made to buy silence, move orphans, and crush opposition through staged charges. "My husband used Red Hollow like a machine," she said, "and you were the gears." A rancher in the back shook his head, tears rising. "My boy, he disappeared 2 years ago." "You think?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I think we all knew something was wrong, and we told ourselves it wasn't our fight." The room fell into a thick, trembling silence. Then McCree stepped forward. "This town's no longer run by shadows," he said. "We've pulled every secret into the light. It's up to you now." Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for Clara. "Please make this mean something." Clara nodded, placing her hand gently over Eleanor's. Jonah stood by the doorway, watching everything with a kind of stillness that came only after surviving too much. He caught McCree's eye. "What now?" the boy asked. "We bring him in," Elias said. "And if he won't come?" McCree glanced toward the door. "Then we go get him." Later that night they rode out. Elias, the Reverend, the sheriff, and 2 townsmen who'd once been on Crane's payroll but had since crossed back over. They found Silas Crane alone in his home on the hill, seated at his desk, pen in hand. He didn't look surprised when McCree walked in. "You always were the stubborn type," Crane said calmly. "You always were the wrong kind of smart," Elias replied. Crane glanced at the documents in McCree's hands. "So that's it then. A sick wife and a crowd of scared farmers finally grew a backbone." "No," McCree said. "A town did." He cuffed Crane quietly, without a fight. As they led him down the steps, the town watched from porches and windows. No one cheered. There was no triumph in it, only release. Clara held Ruth in her arms. Jonah stood beside her, fists clenched at his sides. And as McCree passed them with Crane in tow, Jonah whispered, "He doesn't win anymore." McCree looked at him. "No," he said. "He never really did." Night fell over Red Hollow like a heavy blanket, quiet, still, unnervingly calm. The jailhouse sat at the edge of town, its wooden walls worn but steady, lantern light flickering behind barred windows. Inside, Silas Crane sat alone in the single holding cell, staring at the wall as though it might speak back. McCree hadn't left his post since the arrest. He sat behind the desk, arms crossed, the badge on his chest catching the lamplight. The room was filled with the silence of unfinished justice. Crane hadn't spoken since being locked up, not even when townsfolk began whispering through the bars, or when the sheriff quietly placed Eleanor's signed affidavit on the desk beside Elias. It should have been enough, but McCree had learned the hard way. Nothing was ever over until it truly was. And then the scream came, not from the jailhouse, from Clara's. Elias was on his feet before he registered he was moving. He tore out into the night, heart pounding, revolver drawn. By the time he reached Clara's front door, the town was waking, lights flicking on, voices rising in alarm. The door hung open. Inside, furniture was overturned. Ruth was safe, hiding beneath the table, trembling. Clara stood near the hearth, one arm bleeding from a deep gash. Her eyes were wild. "They took him," she whispered. "Jonah, they took him." Everything stopped. McCree lowered his weapon. "Who?" "I don't know. One man, big. Moved like a tracker, covered his face. He waited until I stepped outside to bring in the washing, then forced his way in." She held out something clenched in her bloodied palm. A silver coin, a calling card. "Rand Lowry!" McCree growled. "He said," Clara choked, "that Crane might be locked up, but this wasn't over. Said you'd know where to find him." McCree's pulse thundered in his ears. Lowry had taken Jonah, not for ransom, for revenge. He turned without a word, marched back to the jailhouse and threw open the door. Crane sat in the cell, smiling faintly, eyes gleaming. "You're a fool," Elias said, stepping inside. "You don't win by hurting children." "I don't have to win," Crane replied. "I just have to remind you what power feels like." McCree stepped close to the bars. "Where'd he take him?" "I don't know," Crane said. "Rand doesn't tell me things anymore. He just believes I'm worth something." Elias stared at him a long moment, then turned and walked out. He didn't wait. He saddled his horse, packed nothing but water, a length of rope, and a single unlit lantern. He knew where Lowry would go. Not far, just far enough. There was a ravine, 10 miles west of town, where the earth cracked open like a scar. A place McCree had tracked outlaws before, where silence swallowed gunfire and secrets vanished into stone. That's where men like Lowry went to do things in the dark. The ride was long and merciless. The moon was high, the wind sharp with desert chill. McCree didn't stop once. Not when his ribs ached, not when the shadows played tricks, not even when doubt whispered that he might be too late. At the edge of the ravine, he dismounted and listened. Silence. Then, faint, Jonah's voice. Strangled, afraid. "No, please don't." McCree moved down the slope, into the canyon toward the sound. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't call out. He came in like a shadow, silent and sure. And there, beneath an outcrop, he saw them. Rand Lowry, crouched beside a rock, holding Jonah by the collar. The boy's lip was bleeding, his hands tied. McCree stepped into the open. He stepped. "Let him go." Lowry turned slowly, calm as ever. "He's a symbol, McCree. That's what you made him. And symbols need to be broken." "You want revenge?" Elias said. "You're looking at it." Lowry rose, drawing his knife. McCree didn't flinch. "No badge, no backup, just me." The two men faced each other in the moonlight, the boy between them. McCree took a slow step forward. "You remember my son?" he asked. He was about Jonah's age. Same eyes, same fire. Lowry didn't answer. "I watched him die," Elias said softly, "and I did nothing. I ran, buried myself in dust and guilt." He stepped closer. "But I won't do it again." Lowry hesitated. Just for a second. It was enough. Jonah moved, quick, desperate, kicked back with all he had, sending Lowry stumbling. McCree lunged, grabbed the boy, and pulled him close. Lowry raised the knife, but Elias had already moved between them. "No more kids," McCree said. Lowry froze, breathing heavy. Then he dropped the knife. It hit the rock with a dull clang. "I've already lost," Lowry muttered. "You just don't know it yet." McCree didn't answer. He tied Rand's hands with the rope he brought, mounted up with Jonah in front of him, and rode back to Red Hollow as the stars began to fade. The town awoke to the sound of hooves and held its breath again. Elias rode straight to the jail, and for the second time in a week, he filled a cell. The days that followed felt like waking from a long sleep. With both Silas Crane and Rand Lowry behind bars, Red Hollow slowly began to breathe again, cautious, tentative, but real. For the first time in years, people lingered in the streets without watching their backs. Children played openly, voices rising in laughter instead of whispers, and no one tore down the signs Clara helped the children make. We belong here. No more silence. We are family. The school was rebuilt plank by plank, not by contractors hired from the next town over, but by neighbors, side by side. Even the sheriff, the young one who had once looked at McCree with doubt, spent hours hauling timber and hammering nails with his own blistered hands. Ruth's health began to return, color blooming in her cheeks, her cough easing in the warmth of the community she now had. Clara taught every day under the new roof, and every evening she and Elias sat side by side on the porch. She didn't ask him to stay, she didn't have to. He already had. Jonah changed too. He didn't flinch at footsteps anymore. He didn't sleep with one eye open. He began to read out loud in Clara's class, his voice soft but growing stronger. And he followed McCree everywhere, not because he was afraid, but because he was learning. The way McCree walked, the way he watched people, the way he listened more than he spoke. It was late one evening, as the sky melted into orange and violet, that McCree stood in front of his old cabin, now fixed, now full of life. Clara was inside, lighting a lantern. Jonah sat on the porch with Ruth curled asleep beside him. McCree walked to the side of the house where a single nail stuck out from the wooden beam, where his badge had once hung, untouched for years. He held it now in his hand, weathered, scratched, but still whole. He looked down at it for a long moment, then he hung it up, let it go. Behind him, Jonah stepped forward. "You're not the sheriff anymore." McCree turned. "No, I'm not." "Why not?" "Because the town doesn't need a badge," he said. "It needs people who give a damn, and it has that now. In you, in her, in all of us." Jonah looked at the badge, then at McCree. "You think I could wear one someday?" McCree smiled, a real one this time. Slow, tired, but full of pride. "I think you already do," he said. Clara stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands. "Supper's ready." They ate together, like a family. And for the first time since the grave took everything from him, Elias McCree didn't feel hollow. He didn't feel like a ghost waiting for the world to forget him. He felt full. He felt home. And as the stars came out over Red Hollow, soft and endless above the quiet land, a single bell rang from the church. Not for warning, not for grief, but for hope. And in the hush that followed, Elias whispered to himself, "Time to live, not punish." Then he turned and walked inside, where he was needed.